This is what the most important law enforcement professionals would use to secure something. But like, is this really safe? I mean, you could cut it open. Why do you think police would use plastic bags instead of like a safe for everything?
The plastic bags make sure you take the fingerprints or DNA off it, and you take it to the lab and you can get all that DNA.
So that's true. He says it would keep all the evidence inside, like fingerprints, but how come someone couldn't just cut it open?
Because the police have it.
Okay, so keeping them in a secure place, like he says it might be in a police station, and it'll be hard to get to. What if you could get your hands on it, though? Why not use like a metal mesh bag, at least? Something better. I saw your hand.
Because they would see that it's broken open or something.
Now, a lot of you probably were thinking this too. He has the right answer. He said they would see if it was broken open. Like if you cut this bag, yes, you could get inside of it. But it's obvious. It performs a function that's not quite like a safe. It's a seal. And all of these bags have their own unique serial numbers on them, and they all get signed in and out. So even if something could be ripped apart and destroyed, it's still protecting sensitive material. So, I'm losing my mouse. There we go. So you can think about a lot of the locks we use every day. For instance, here's a locked trunk, and it has a big padlock on it. But again, someone could come along, and they could like chop the lock off. And if you even have, big doors of a building, or maybe the front door of your house.
Break the window.
Yeah, you might have glass, and someone says, "Oh, why lock your doors?" Someone could just smash the window. That's valid. I mean, it's true. Someone could try to break their way in. But if they do it in a way that you can see that it happened, the lock is still doing its job. That's why we talk about lock picking, because lock picking, if you were to open a lock without someone knowing that you opened it, that's the real, consideration in terms of security. That's what locks really do for us. They don't just prevent access by preventing people from smashing in, they also kind of act like a seal if they're good enough locks. We'll talk about some locks that aren't quite good enough to do that. But just to illustrate this point one more time, I want to tell a story about sailors. My grandfather was in the Navy. My father was Army, my grandfather was Navy. And I love old sailing stories. I love knots and rope. I used to be in the Cub Scouts when I was little, and we used to learn a lot of like tying knots. Now, when sailors would travel the world on their ships, they would come into port sometimes. And a port, back especially in history, a port was a very frenzied place. A lot of people coming and going, a lot of trading and commerce. And sailors were worried that if someone got on the boat and got into their possessions, someone might steal something and run away with it. Now, we don't have lockers and safes on old-time boats like that, at least not for every sailor. But sailors started to do something very cool with rope to act as a seal on their personal possessions. Does anyone know what that knot is? Yeah, some people who know some camping and rope work. So a square knot, or a reef knot, probably one of the most famous knots you can learn to tie. It's a very easy knot, very, very common. All sailors knew this knot. And there used to be a time when you could tell someone didn't know a lot about knots. If you said, "Tie me a knot," and anybody who knows knots knows this is not a square knot. That's a granny knot, exactly. So the little loose ends are coming off the wrong corners. So if someone was a good ropesmith, a sailor, they'd say, "Oh, I can tie a reef knot, a square knot, really easy." And sailors used to tie their bags up with square knots. The reason being, they would come back to their ship if they had gone off onto the shore, and they'd look around, and they'd say, "Oh, wait a minute, why is my bag untied, or why is it in a granny knot? Someone's been in my bag," and they would look around and try to find stolen things. But eventually, thieves and ruffians started learning the reef knot. And they said, "Oh man, if I retie a reef knot on this bag, and then I run away, the sailor might not notice that somebody was in the bag, and I could be long gone." So sailors actually themselves developed another kind of knot. It's a very interesting knot. This is not used for any real maritime purpose. And if I tie this knot and hold it up, those of you who identified the square knot earlier, ends are coming off opposite sides. This is called a thief knot. And the funny thing about a thief knot is, it looks very similar to a square knot, a reef knot, but it's virtually impossible to tie accidentally. It's very hard to tie in general. I couldn't just flip the ends together. When I tied a thief knot, I actually had to take a bite of rope and manually fish through here and fish over here and pull the end. But imagine if a sailor were to do that on their bag. They tie a thief knot and then they tuck the ends kind of into the bag. Someone comes along and all they see is the outside. They go, oh, reef knot, they pull the knot open. They take whatever they want. And they go, I don't want anyone to see this. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to tie a reef knot and leave it alone. But the sailor comes back and goes, hey, this isn't what I left here. Who's been in my bag? So we've been using the idea of seals for security long before we actually had hard metal locks for security. So keep that in mind when we talk about lock picking. The main reason you use a lock is not just to slow down or kind of stop an attacker from taking your things, but it's so that you leave the attacker no choice but to disturb the lock or break it in a way that will be noticeable to you if you come back later. So let's talk about lockpicking. That's what you're here to really learn. You can learn about knots just about anywhere, but lockpicking is not the most common topic. Most of the locks you use every day probably could be picked over most of the cheap, common locks. So consider, well, first thing, I should make sure you consider there are two rules we're going to cover here. There are two golden rules of lockpicking, and if you follow these rules, you, I hope, will never get in trouble. One, do not pick locks if you don't own them. We'll touch on this again later, but the two biggest rules are A, don't pick locks you don't own, and B, don't pick locks on which you rely. Now, when I spread my locks out later, yes, you don't own them, but I'm giving you my explicit permission. But when you go home, and you say, well, I learned this lockpicking stuff, I own this lock, it's on my own door, I wouldn't pick that lock either. Because it's possible, it's not likely, but it's possible that picking a lock could damage it. Maybe not permanently, but it still stinks if you've got to go to school and then you can't actually close your house, or you can't get your bike to lock up. So you don't pick locks if you don't own them because they're not yours, and you don't pick locks if you rely on them because they're part of your security. Almost all of the locks we use day in and day out are the same type. So here we have a doorknob, here we have a padlock kind of hanging on its side, here we have a deadbolt. These are all the same mechanism internally. They look very different, but all inside, all of these locks are doing the exact same thing. Because these are all locks of a design called the pin tumbler design. And this design has been with us for over 100 years. It was developed in New England, in America here, about 100 years ago, right around the turn of the century. And it's relatively unchanged ever since then. So many of you have seen locks like this. When you use a key, you stick it in and you turn. If you were to look deep inside the lock, what's actually happening is this. Many of you might know that locks have pins in them somewhere. That's why we call them pin tumbler locks. But if you've never looked inside or seen a lock taken apart, you might not realize that the lock has a stack of pins. So from the outside, if you kind of just barely look the right way into a lock, you might see a tiny piece of a pin. You guys see that red piece right here? That's one of the pins in this lock. But up inside, further up than you can see, there's a blue pin. And these are just my colors for this diagram. That blue pin, that's what we call the driver pin. That's what actually holds the lock shut. I remember when I was a little kid and I saw people using locks, I would try to stick things sometimes into locks and turn them, but they wouldn't turn. Well, this is why you can't just stick anything into a lock and make it turn. That round part that's called the plug doesn't have the ability to turn right now because the blue pin, the driver pin, is in the way. However, if you have the correct key, when you stick a key into a lock, the key rides into that red pin, that's called the key pin because it touches the key. If you push the red pin, it pushes the blue pin, it pushes the whole pin stack just to the right height. That the break between those two pins is at the edge of the plug, then the blue pin is not blocking, the red pin is not blocking, the plug can turn. Does this make sense? You now understand mechanically what is happening in virtually all of your locks. They are really just about this simple. And it doesn't matter which way the lock is facing. Remember we showed that padlock that was kind of on its side? Or if you travel to other countries, here in America, when we hold a key, usually the little teeth on the key, you kind of hold them up. That's common. But in other countries, that's usually not the norm. In like Europe, in parts of Germany and Holland, where Tool is originally from, you normally hold the key the other way, and the pins are kind of underneath the plug. And so the whole thing looks upside down, but that's okay. Because this whole affair, the pin stack, has a spring. So when there's no key in the lock, the pin stack is always at rest like that. But ultimately, this is the only thing happening in your locks. Just about. If we were to kind of look from the side, you would see it's not one pin stack. It's a series of pin stacks in the lock. But they all work the same way. They all have that red key pin. They all have that blue driver pin. They all have a spring. The only difference from one position to the next is the size of that red pin. And the reason those pins are different sized is because the key that you might use, your key will have different cuts in different positions. That's what's happening when you insert the key into a lock. The idea is the teeth on the key, the cuts, that's called the bitting. If the bitting is correct, your key goes all the way in, and then every pin stack is right at the edge, and it's free to turn. And if you have so much as one cut in the wrong position, like here, this cut right here, it's a little too deep. So that pin stack's a little too low. So that blue pin, even though all the others are correct, that blue pin is still stuck. It can't turn. And likewise, if it was a little too high, the red pin, that'll stick just as much as the blue pin. So you can't be too high, you can't be too low. You have to be right in the middle. Now, let me explain why it's possible to open a lock without... This is a picture of the plug, the round part that turns. Imagine we've stripped the lock apart, dumped all the pins out of it, and you're just looking at the plug, kind of down from above. So those holes are drilled into the plug. Those are the holes where the pins get put. In a perfect world, all of those holes would be perfectly aligned because all the pins are perfectly in a row. In a perfect world, no key in the lock. You try to stick something in and turn it. All of those blue pins, they're all at the wrong height right now. So they're all hitting. They're all sticking. I don't know if you can see in the back, but in yellow, kind of flashing, it says bind, bind. That's in locksmithing terms. We refer to the pins are binding, they're jamming. None of those pins have been lifted up, so they're binding. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where not everything comes out exactly the way you want it, where sometimes your dinner gets a little overcooked, or sometimes you're a little bit late. How those holes aren't perfectly lined up? Imagine 5 people standing in a row, and you stand straight in the line, get all together. But they don't, they're not perfect. They're just kind of, not in the army, you just kind of stand around, and you're not quite in a perfect line. And you say, walk forward. Well, if y'all walk forward, one person will kind of run into a table before everyone else because you weren't quite lined up. That's what happens with these pins. No key in the lock, all the pins are down, but if you try to turn this plug, it doesn't hit or bind on all the blue pins because they're not lined up. Does it make sense why it's only binding or jamming on one pin? You can shout and say yeah. Kind of makes sense? Well, if it's only jamming on one pin, you put a little pressure on a lock and push up. The pin that's jamming will eventually get to the right height and no longer be jamming or stuck. The pin you're pushing up will eventually become what we call set. And if you set that pin, it's not holding the lock shut anymore. Maybe another pin somewhere else will start working.
the idea is, for lock picking, you go in with one tool, put a little turning pressure on the plug, and a pin is binding somewhere. You don't know where. But by reaching in with picks, you can feel around, try to find the binding pin, and you feel a little bit of friction maybe, and it might click, get stuck. Does everyone understand why it gets stuck? Because the plug has that little bit of movement. And one by one, reaching in with very, very gentle turning pressure and dedicated exploring, you can try to find places in the lock where the pins are getting stuck. And more as you try it, you get to almost see with your hands. You can tell as you're going through, I feel one, I feel another one. And you'll know it when you get the last one because the lock just turns. Yes, sir? The question was, is it possible that some other pins might fall down and mess up? Absolutely. And you're referring to a pin that you would properly set, and then if you let off your pressure, it would fall. Yes. So if you're not very dedicated, and this is what, when you get really good at picking, this is what it's about. It's about really learning to control your finger pressure. Speaking of little problems, many people when they're starting out, especially if, let's say, you're all sitting in this lesson,
Somebody else comes in later and they see you guys picking, or they come down to the table. We're going to be at a table
downstairs, I think. And they, oh, was this lock picking? And they start trying and they just start jamming picks in. A lot of times people might do something like this. They might start out correct. And they're picking. But then imagine if you push a pin too far. Now the red pin's jamming. Now what are you going to do? Nothing. You have to release pressure and let everything fall back down. You overlift it. So a lot of times when we have people come up to us who haven't sat one of our lessons, they go, oh, is this that picking? And they just start jamming stuff, and they go, hey, I got them all shoved up. It's not turning.
We say, you weren't in the lesson, were you? So it's not just let's shove everything up as high as it can go.
It's gentle, dedicated work. Now there are other kinds of tools. Oh, question, yes.
The red pin, can't get the red pin down and you have to call it.
Very good question. So her question was, are there ever situations where the red pin, the key pin, you get it stuck up there and it doesn't ever want to come down? Very rarely. It's usually not possible to get that red pin jammed up so badly that it doesn't come back. Normally, if you rattle a lock around, normally just letting go of this first tool. This tool is called the turning tool. We'll talk about that in a minute. Normally, just letting go of that turning pressure is enough to let all the pins come down because those springs want to push the pins down. Worst case, if you think you have a lock that's really jammed up, you hand it to me, I can usually feel it. I might rattle it or bang it a couple times. But that's part of what we talk about in terms of not picking locks that you rely on. You don't want to jam your lock up so badly that it doesn't even work with the key. But that's not common. That's not a problem you would normally have to worry about. Now there are other tools. Were you stretching or was that a question? Okay, I think you were stretching. There are other tools, and when you have the tools in front of you, you'll see some of them don't look like that hook that we saw. Some of them look like little squiggles. Now, squiggly tools or raking tools are made to touch multiple pins at once. So with raking, it's not like a dedicated, I'm going to push this, then I'm going to push this. I wonder if I push this. No, raking, much more rapid of a movement. Little oscillations, even faster than this diagram gives you the idea. Little oscillations, little angles, just trying to see what you can make happen. For example, when we're sitting at the table, I'll try all different types of lock picking. But for now, because it's the fastest direct example I can give, I'm going to hold this tool up. This is a raking tool, and in the back it's a little hard to see, I realize, but come join us at the table later. This is just a regular pin tumbler lock. I'm going to insert a turning tool, and it's a little awkward for me to hold it so that you can see. This tool does not want to turn the lock right now. The lock is binding and shut. And if I take my raking tool, Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but that lock is picked. Right, that's open. So yeah, I mean that's all there is to it. You're all going to do this. Well, you don't even have to applaud for that one. That was weak sauce. Most locks are really, really easy to open because most locks aren't designed to be robust against this sort of thing. There are a number of different types of pick tools. Some are little hooks, some are rakes. Some people might even see the diamond in the middle. They say, what do you do with that? You do whatever you want. Diamond tools are designed to kind of lift or kind of rake. You can do either. They fit into tight spaces. But the most important tool of all, and if you ever get a lockpick kit, you'll get a bunch of different things in it. The most important tools are actually the turning tools. How you hold them, how you use them, how gently you push on them. Turning tools are what really control lockpicking. How you turn the plug to try to gently put pressure on it. And this picture right here says this is mad turning. Now all the adults in the room, all the kids in the room, I mean, you grow up in a generation where you don't see TV commercials anymore because that's good thanks to TiVo and stuff. But adults who know about TV commercials know that this is bad because it's in black and white. And if anyone is in black and white in a TV commercial, they can't do anything right. And they don't know how to cook correctly or iron their pants. Are you tired of your lock stuff? But see how this person has kind of thrown a finger over the tool and they're pulling? I don't think that's a very soft way to use the tool. I think pushing with your fingertip, maybe right out at the edge of the tool, might be a little bit of a more controlled way of using that turning pressure. As long as your finger is nice and pink and fingertip colored, you're probably fine. If, however, your fingertip starts turning white, you're pushing way too hard. This is the biggest problem people have when they try lockpicking. It's too much pressure. It will amaze you how little pressure you need on your tools, on your lifters, on your picks. Most people, when they try it, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take a turning tool, put it right into the lock, away from the pins. They tend to have these big heads on them. It'll insert in here. It will take up a little bit of space, but most of the locks we use, it doesn't matter. The keyhole is so big, you can still get other tools in there. Some people do like to put their picks right up against the front face of the lock. That's called the center of the plug turning. And it gives you more room, but obviously it doesn't hold very well. When you hold the locks downstairs, just nestle them in your hand in a way that lets you interact with the front, but doesn't cover up the back. This is something we always have to tell people. If you just ball the lock up in your fist, you're essentially holding the plug from the back side. So make sure your hand is okay there and nice and open in the back. If you do that, and if you relax, I promise you it's going to work. And you'll all get to try this. And when you get a lock open, you have to say, open, so that everyone around you knows that it's possible. And if you ever see videos of professional lock competitions, for instance, Tool is an organization that just runs lock workshops, lock contests. You'll see all around the room, you go, open, open, offen, when all the Germans pick their locks and they're really good. So I hope you all try this. Now we have a few other topics to show you, but how many people are going to tell me right now they want to try this? Because I brought a lot. All right, good. I brought a lot of stuff that I'm going to set up, and I'm going to be there all day. So you come around, and whenever you want, you'll be able to try this. Did it make sense what we were talking about? Is it clear? All right. Well, let's talk about a couple other things. Now, we already covered the 2 golden rules. Will you all agree that you will not pick locks you don't own, and you will not pick locks if you rely on them every day? Yep. I need to hear yes.
Yes.
Now for the parents, when people say, hey, can I buy a lockpick set? And I say, yeah, they're for sale at Tool.us. Tool is a nonprofit, if you're curious. But when you say, well, I don't know if we can buy a lockpick set. You know, maybe you live in this area, maybe you live, I'm from Philadelphia, I don't live near here.
If you're curious about the laws regarding lockpicking, Tool has paid a lot of money to our lawyers, and we researched all the statutes on all the books in all the states. Almost everywhere, you see a lot of green on this map. Almost everywhere, lockpicks are perfectly legal. There are many criminal codes that speak about being a burglar or having burglary tools. Yes, lockpicks would be illegal if you tried to break in somewhere, but so is a big wrench, so is a hammer. Those are all burglary tools. As long as you are not doing something wrong, as long as you are following the 2 golden rules, you are probably perfectly fine. If you live in any of the amber-colored states or the one red state of Tennessee, ask me about it. You're probably fine there as well, but I can explain more. But for a minute, let's talk about a type of lock that is very near and dear to a lot of people. How many people have ever seen a lock like this? Moms and dads alike raise their hands. Yeah, this is literally the most popular lock in America. It is our absolute most common lock, and we use it on most of our lockers at school or at the gym. Clearly, I'm always at the gym, as you can tell. So this kind of a lock, I mean, there's no keyhole on it, right? You don't use a key, so you can't use picks. So it must be perfectly secure. It's got to be awesome. We should all use this, right? No, we like to say that if you are using this very cheap, very simple combination lock, you're basically just asking that your stuff be there later. And the reason for that is something I'm going to demonstrate now, and that's called shimming. A padlock shim. Just because something looks secure doesn't mean it is secure. So shims are something that locksmiths will use to quickly open a lot of padlocks. A shim slips down inside the shackle, and it just pushes that little latch bar out of the way. So when you have a combination lock and it's open, if you want to close it, do you have to dial the combination again? No, you just slap it shut. Because inside that lock, there's a little latch, and that latch has a spring, and the latch says, oh, the shackle's coming down. I've got to get out of the way. Well, if you slip something thin down inside the lock and push on the latch, it goes, oh, I'm being pushed. Oh, this must be the shackle coming down. I have to get out of the way. Click. A shim will slip in, push the latch, and pop the lock right open.
That's
Now,
so
something that you
easy.
can do if you're not a locksmith, and we do this all the time, is you can make your own shims. If you take some metal, and I'm going to breeze through this, because if your parents want you to learn it later, they can look it up with you. But if you cut and fold some metal, you can make a shim just like what a locksmith would have. And that will slip down inside of a lock. You twist it, you jam it, you turn it, and pop things open. Now, I'll try to demo that right here. So yeah, I'm going to use metal from a can of soda here. I'm going to cut it up a little bit. All right. And if everyone can kind of see, I'm going to cut this metal into a little bit of a shape. That is aluminum. Most professional locksmith shims are made with steel, but aluminum is, cheap and readily available in beverage cans. Now, right now, I'm just kind of folding it up. So, if whoa, I'm going to trip over myself. Did it go out?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's fine. It was the perfect time to go out because now we have a demo here. So I've cut and folded a little piece of metal. And if I stick this in this lock, and if I'm a little lucky, I may have to try it on a couple locks because the more you do it, it starts to damage the locks. See, this is my perfect plan. I needed time to wait for this to warm back up. Or actually wait for it to cool off properly because it gets angry when the projector just dies. I might cut a second one in a minute. Well, maybe not. Let's see. If I've gotten this jammed in, Now that one might have cracked. Let me cut a fresh one. And this is a valuable lesson to anyone who's going to start doing like presentations and public speaking. If you ever, I don't know, they always used to say when we were in school, everyone was afraid of public speaking. I really don't know why. I've kind of always liked it. And right here, like you're here, you're learning from me, you're enjoying. That didn't work perfectly well. Who cares? Nothing in the real world works perfectly every time. So you take a breath, you move on, you try it again. Don't ever be afraid of not doing something right the very first time, as long as you keep trying to learn why it didn't work and try again. That might be warming back up for us. So, let's try this again. I've got the shim. I'm sticking it into the lock. Now I think, yeah. There we go. That was literally, 30 seconds with a piece of a soda can? Apparently, there are people in this world who don't realize that locks like that are not to be trusted. Because this is a very nice bike that I once saw locked up with one of these very cheap locks.
Oh, that's why they're cheap.
To each his own. I mean, if that's how you want to protect your stuff, fine. But I hope you're starting to now think that just because something looks like it's secure, it doesn't make it secure unless you've checked it out. Unless you've tried to research how it might break or how it might fail. And that's, frankly, that's what a lot of, thinking like a hacker is about. It's considering unexpected ways that something might work. Considering an unexpected way to attack or to tweak something. Speaking of bikes being locked up, something I noticed in another country, my friends would do, if they would lock up their bike, they would actually check the pole. They would check this, this is a road sign, and they go, okay, and they check it out. And I'd be like, what are you doing? And my friend in Germany, he said, oh yeah, there's a big problem here. You don't know this? I'd never heard of this before. What some criminals would do is actually, instead of attacking a lock, they would weaken and disturb the pole. They would wait for someone to lock the bike, then come along at night, take the whole pole, put it back, run away, and then wait for some other poor person to come along and lock their bike up. And do this over and over. And when I started dating a young lady in Chicago a long time ago, I would look around and I started looking more closely at certain poles in her neighborhood. And I said, well, that's kind of odd. The bolt looks a little bit strange on one of these parts of the pole. And I don't know if you can see it on this projector, but there's another hole right here. And it looked like, I looked and I pulled, someone had just broken the bolt, taken it out, put a fresh one in, and left it there. And a lot of places around the city, I would find these street signs that I could just lift right out. And be like, are you bloody kidding me? So you never know exactly how something that you want to protect might be vulnerable. In the real world, you want to consider that most criminals, most people, will just break something. They'll chop a lock, or they'll try to pry the door, they'll destructively try to get in. But if you have a really, really weak lock, and something you have is really valuable, you have to be concerned about them not destructively getting in, but maybe picking their way in. Does this happen a lot in the real world? No. Maybe in the business world where companies want to steal each other's information. But for the most part, destructive entry is what happens. But if you want to be really secure, consider getting a lock that is very resistant against non-destructive entry too. My favorite story about all of this has to do with this big padlock made by a company called American Lock. And they've now been acquired by Master Lock. But there's this big style. It was the most popular lock you used to see on city streets at night when all the stores would close and they bring the gates down. You'd see these big locks hanging on the gates. But somebody took a look at how this lock worked. This man named Ken. Ken has a company in upstate New York making locksmith tools. And he looked and he said, okay, well this lock, it has a hole that runs through here, and it has this goes through here. And Ken made what is called the bypass tool. Now this is not a lockpick. I really wish I had brought one with you. You would love to see it. It sticks all the way through the lock, goes right past the pins, and just pops the release catch from the inside. Because what you're seeing, this is not where the key goes in. This is the back side of the plug. The keyway is cut all the way through. It's crazy, right? But Ken said, why am I attacking these pins? I can just reach right through and flick the lock open. An American Lock went, oh my God, that's awful. Oh, this is bad. But what American Lock did is they said, well, look, our locks are designed to pop apart. They manufacture a little disc of metal, a little security wafer, they call it, and they said, look, eject your lock, put this on, put it back together, and it covers up that hole. If any of your parents do a lot of things with software, or if you're techie families, it's like they released a patch. It's like they said, download this, and your lock is the new version. But then what happens? As you get a little older, some of you might get into something called reverse engineering. Some of you might be doing it now. If a new patch comes out, you go, well, what did they do? Let me see. Oh, they fixed this. Well, I can break it this way. Well, Ken said, all right, so I see what you did there. You made a security wafer. So Ken made this. It's a little spike in a spreader, and you hit it and you turn it. It's called a wafer breaker, and it punches a hole right where it has to be. But the coolest thing about this is that in the end, American Lock said, look, we're not going to fix this with 10 cents worth of steel. And American Lock changed their whole design. And because of disclosure, because of talking about a problem, if you find a problem, you don't just keep it to yourself, and you don't just, whisper about it in the corner. You talk about it with people. You say, hey, I found this interesting thing. Has anyone else thought of it this way? And if the manufacturer is a good manufacturer, they'll say, oh, wow, we hadn't even thought of it that way. Now, the locks we use, the most popular lock is this hockey puck style or shackleless padlock. This is not vulnerable to that bypass. So because Ken exposed bad security, it made it better security for all of us. And that's what hacking's about. It's about exploring, learning something new, and then sharing that knowledge so that other people can benefit from it. And the older you get, you're going to start acquiring things in life. You're going to have things that are valuable, things that are sensitive, things that you don't want other people to get their hands on. And as you acquire these things, how do you think you're going to protect them? Are you going to protect them with the cheapest lock you can find? Or maybe you're going to be interested in a better lock that resists all kinds of attacks. So that's why we wanted you to learn, and that's why I want you to play, and I thank you for listening. So we have some time for questions, and then later I'll be set up in the area. I see a hand there. Shout it out.
So, why don't you not like just fix your own?
So, good question. The question was, why not just make your own lock? Some people are doing that. Some really dedicated locksmiths will come up with a new design, and they'll sort of take the world by storm, and they'll say, no one's ever seen this before, and it's good for a while. And someone says, boy, you should have consulted other people. You might not be perfect, because the world's not perfect. So there might be problems that you hadn't thought of. One of the neatest... What's that?
I mean to make it like, when you just make your own lock, or only you get it.
Oh, like a lock that no one else ever gets to see. Do you mean?
You, yeah.
So, even if you were to make a lock that no one else gets, like it's not on the shelf, no one else can buy it, it's just yours, I would say that's one type of security, but relying exclusively on being hidden from view isn't always perfect security. Some people might call, some people use the phrase security by obscurity. That's a phrase you might hear. It's not worthless, but I always think security through openness is best. There is, in fact, something called the open source lock that is being developed by a number of locksmiths who are collaborating publicly with lock pickers and sport pickers, and I think there's some promise there. In general, whether you use it just for yourself or if it's something that everyone gets to explore, as long as people are exploring it and trying to tinker with it, I kind of think that's a good solution. Were there any other questions? Right here, sir. Yes. So the gentleman asked, what about in movies or spy shows? when you see someone attacking a lock with like a big grip type, almost like a pistol tool, that's called a snapper gun. So a snapping gun, it's not something we covered here. We can talk about it downstairs if you like. Snapping or bumping attacks, they are kinetic energy attacks designed to make the pins very briefly jump out of position. And I can illustrate it with some diagrams downstairs. It's not something that we cover very much because snapping or bumping, it's almost like a pre-compiled exploit. Like it's a really low-tech attack. But I can talk about it and show you how it works. It's very easy to prevent if the lock is well designed. But most locks are indeed, that's not fake, it's not movie magic, that is real. But fortunately, because bumping especially has been in the news lately, a lot of manufacturers are trying to make their locks bump resistant, which would be snap resistant. Yes, right there, sir.
So presumably then more expensive locks and manufacturers with tighter tolerances, so these kind of attack much more distance.
Absolutely, another good question. So the gentleman asks, what about more expensive locks that are manufactured to a tighter tolerance? So the pins are lined up really precisely. That absolutely will make it harder to pick. And manufacturers will also add other elements like shaping of the pins. We can talk about that downstairs. I have some locks that are pick resistant because the pins aren't perfectly smooth. They have ridges or lips and they jam if you try to... Because normally when you use a key, it's lift the pins, then turn. Picking, just reverses that. It's turn, then lift the pins. Well, if you can get the pins to jam, manufacturers will do that too. Question here, yes, miss? I love that question because it's right on the cusp of an answer that I can give yes, but not really. Her question was, is it possible to make a lock, or does a lock exist, that is really just not able to be picked, like it's made so well? Almost yes, but not for the reasons you're thinking. I'll pass something around. Manufacturers learned a while ago that simply making the lock smoother and more perfect doesn't fully eliminate picking. It just makes it a lot harder. Other manufacturers, however, and this is from Scandinavia, this is a Finnish company, have started to move completely away from designs involving pins at all. This lock, which I will pass around, is probably my favorite lock currently. You can try it first. That is a rotating disc mechanism, and the lock doesn't have pins. Inside the lock are a series of teeny tiny wheels that spin. And the only way to get the key out is if it's fully locked again. But if you pull that key out of there, you'll see it doesn't look like a regular key. That lock has no, the way we would phrase it, no publicly known attack or bypass or defeat. That doesn't mean it's unpickable, but it's about as close as we would come to using that phrase. It means that the amount of time, and I can explain downstairs if you want to see how that mechanism works. Essentially, it means there's if you try to turn the lock, all the wheels in the lock get jammed together, so you can't manipulate them individually like you would with picks. That lock design, the Alloy company out of Finland has been making rotating disc locks also for almost 100 years. The Protect, that model, is their most recent. Actually, the Protect 2 is their most recent. I utterly love that lock. A company in Austria named Eva makes a lock called the MCS, the Magnetic Code System. It's a key that has tiny magnets that rotate pieces in the lock. There's a company in Sweden called ASA. ASA makes the Desmo. I'm just tossing terms out. These would all be in the category of what she asked. Locks for which there are no currently known attack. And that doesn't mean a government somewhere might not know attack. It does mean that, for instance, what I'm passing around, that's my luggage lock. When I fly with hard-sided cases. I put those on my luggage. And I know that if the luggage comes out, like I landed here, and I get my luggage off the belt, and those locks are still there, like not cut, I am 99.9% sure no one's been in that luggage. No one in the baggage area of an airport is going to know any type of attack or defeat for a lock like that. So it's the best lock I can get to act as a seat. Any other? Yes, sir.
Are there similar locks for like a front door?
The question was, are there similar locks for front door? Yes. A company When all these brands that I mentioned, we don't work for them. Tools, very independent, very separate. There is one company that we are friendly with, because a company named Security Snobs. Security Snobs is a business that we buy some of our locks from. They're one of the few dealers in the U.S. that sell some of these high-end locks. They make them as padlocks, and Mitch, the guy who owns it, he's made them into door locks as well, deadbolts and other things like that. They are much more common in the Euro profile and Euro door locks because they're European brands, but it is possible. Here in the U.S., you want the simplest, good enough, very nice lock. I would say get the Schlage lock, the Schlage Primus. The current high-end lock from Schlage. Schlage's an American company. It's owned by Ingersoll Rand. If you get a Schlage lock and it's pinned by a competent locksmith, making anti-bump pins, anti-pick pins, and it's the Primus, very, very hard.
Around, turn it.
I can tell you that. Behind you, yes.
The big padlock scale. Very nice. So, the gentleman is asking a question about tubular locks. You may have seen these on bikes, like bike locks. For a long time, drop things on the floor. It's hard to see in the back, but this style of lock,
This sort of round hole where the pins are all around in a circle. But yes, well, he mentioned straw here. This man in the back mentioned Bic pen. There was a very weak version of this tubular lock that was able to be attacked with just sticking any round object in and popping it open. At that time, it was the Kryptonite company that got into a lot of PR problems because their locks were shown on the Flight 4 on YouTube. Yes, miss.
So you see the how the burglar has a stethoscope on and they're listening and they decide where they're going to turn the knob.
So, the lady asks, is there any truth to scenes in movies and TV where someone might have a stethoscope and they're listening inside the lock? Well, mostly that's Hollywood hogwash. Even where it's most commonly seen, which is when you're attacking safe dials. That's, for the most part, dramatics, theatrics. It is possible, however, to attack a safe dial with very light touch, and you're trying to feel for very small points of contact. It's not out of the realm of possibility that someone could be listening and trying to feel that a very high-end safe cracker, which I am not. I mean, I can show you how to manipulate a safe, but they would probably not be using auditory systems. And if you're picking, no, that's all in the realm of Hollywood. And speaking of Hollywood getting it wrong, have you ever seen pictures of lockpicking that you're thinking like in TV shows or where they don't even have two tools, or where they have two picks and no turning tool? Yeah, you need a turning tool and a pick. So she says, what about credit cards? And by that, she's not referring to hey, I'll pay you $100 if you open this. She's referring to slipping a credit card into a door.
Yeah.
That is technically an attack called loiding, L-O-I-D-I-N-G, loiding. Loiding is much like that shimming of the padlock I did. Loiding is just slipping a latch. It's why a door that you want to keep really well shut, you don't want a door that just clicks shut when you close it with a spring, but you want a deadbolt. Something that will... That's why a deadbolt is called dead. It doesn't move. It doesn't have spring pressure. It throws one way, and when you go the other way, it will throw it back the other way. It's very true. Yes, sir. So the lock, when you're talking about the credit card attack, could be on the other side. You're saying you flipped it the other way? Oh, so he's referring to what if the latch is mounted on the other side, the door is hung the other way, so you're not just slipping the credit card in. They make special tools for locksmiths that are long and skinny like a credit card, but they have hooks on the end. They're called shove knives or slip knives, and the idea is you reach around and pull. But all of that can be defeated, sort of.
If you've ever seen, now let me have a minute or two, I might even pull up because you asked the question, I'm going to pull up footage or something that'll make this clearer. It's a style of door latch that got changed a little while ago.
And if you don't mind me just flipping through other things here. The reason it's hard to do those kind of attacks nowadays the following.
There we are.
I know. There. This will come up in a minute. So the idea of slipping behind and just, this is what you're talking about. Pulling and just pulling the latch. However, many people, if you look at a door latch, you'll notice there's the main plunger part, there's the main latch, which when I was growing up, I mean, kids today probably always see this. When I was growing up, this is all the door had. It didn't have the other part. Nowadays, doors have this extra little button. That is the anti-loading or anti-thrust mechanism. And when a door is open, normally you only see this when the door is open. And you're looking at the door and you can push either one of them and, you know, what's it doing? It doesn't matter. The idea is when a proper door shuts, the strike plate, the hole in the wall, is so skinny that the yellow part will stick out into the wall. The red button stays pushed in. And you can try this on any door. Go up to a door that has this. Push the little button in, which simulates the door being shut. Push the little button in, and then try to push on the big part. It won't go. The idea is if the door is shut, it can't be slipped or credit carded or anything. That's called an anti-loading or anti-thrust mechanism to prevent bypassing.
The question is, what is special about Medico locks, the gentleman asked?
Medico is a very popular brand for high security here in the US. Medico locks utilize what's known as a side bar. So in addition to pins going up and down, a bar has to fall inward, and that bar can only fall inward if other conditions are met. Specific to Medico locks, that means the pins are lifting and spinning into place. I have footage of that I can show you down the table. Yes, here and then please. Yes.
Can you address how to break into cars or how to lock your keys in?
Sure. So the question, this is very outside of the scope of what we usually talk about, but I'll touch on it. That's okay. I mean, because the question pertained to automotive. So almost everything, when you think about automotive locks, if a locksmith comes because you're stuck out of your car, they will very rarely, especially on modern cars, very rarely will they attack the lock. Old cars, you could usually just break the lock. I mean, the mechanism is a style of mechanism we didn't even show because it's simpler. It's called a wafer lock. I had a big GMC truck for a long time, and I could get into it just as easily with my braking and jiggling tools as I could with my keys. There was one time my buddy, I was flying in from Russia, and he was flying out to California, and we were not going to meet each other, but I wanted to get home from the airport. And I said, well, just take my truck to the airport, park it, and leave the key in the truck. He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I have my jiggler, so I'll just, jiggle the door open, and I was fine. So older trucks, older cars and trucks, you can usually just jiggle in. But modern vehicles, really high-end vehicles, no one's attacking the lock. They're reaching around the windows, they're reaching through the rubber seal, they're reaching through with long, long rods, trying to just pull door handles. Because if you're ever inside of a car and it's locked, if you're ever stuck in a car, it's not like, help, I've locked my keys out of the car. You just open the door. So that's what most locksmiths will do. They have specialized training to know where they can reach around the rubber without damaging parts of the door so that they can just... There was a hand maybe over here.
Yes.
I was just, I have a safe that if somebody tries to pick my safe, all the bars lock it, and then I have to bring in a specialist to saw it out.
Yes. So the lady
So
here, she
explain
has...
what that kind of mechanism is, because he didn't, when
Absolutely.
he delivered, it's 4,000 pounds. So
Absolutely.
he told me they couldn't carry it out, but if somebody tried to pick it, there's like 18 or 20, 1-inch steel bars that will...
So what she is describing is a safe that she has, a very high-end safe. It sounds very nice. It's what is known as a relocker. And many safes will have certain types of, quote, relocker mechanisms. Essentially, and the way she describes hers is very common, if the safe is violently disturbed, usually through destructive or very profound attack.
Or a saw, somebody tries to drill a saw on it.
The safe has its normal bolt work that is holding it shut. But in addition to that, her safe and many safes have additional bolts
that are all on springs, like ready to go. They want to shoot through and hold the safe shut. And the only thing holding them back is a very tamper-evident type of material, often glass.
Yeah,
Glass
he told me
is
it was
very common.
glass.
So imagine a pane of glass right here with little wires going in all directions, holding on to. In fact, can you stand up? And can you stand up? Come with me. Stand as close to me as you absolutely can.
Big salmon.
And link my arms. Lean away from me. Now imagine if someone comes up and just punches me in the face and I fall down, knocked out. If I move my arms, they're going to fall over me. Thank you, guys. That's what's happening in your safe. If that pane of glass gets shattered, all the bolts on all the sides, they suddenly spring away because they're being pushed. And the only thing holding them there is glass. So it's really neat, the low-tech way that a lot of our locks work. And really basic principles of physics and mechanics are all that are involved. So, I mean, that's why Tool loves them. That's why, as I said, Tool is a nonprofit. We just conduct workshops, lockpick villages, lockpick training days. There is a Tool chapter right here in the Bay Area. If you want to visit us on the web, tool.us, you can find out all the slides, all the materials. They all wind up online. All the pics, all the everything, they're all for sale. It supports us. I'm just happy that you're here, and I hope you all had hands up. You're going to come learn, right? You're going to come try it?
Tom, was that you saying over?
Yep, I got basic 1 and school 1.
We can't really read the...
Do you guys want to go see how the internet works?
Yeah, we'll be here all day just about.
Yeah.
Till lunch, maybe a little after lunch, so no rush.
You guys want to go watch how the internet works? Or you want to learn to lock pick?
I'm almost done with all of them. I'm actually
Okay.
locking them.